you have a legislature that's supposed to make laws, that's supposed to check and balance the executive. If the legislature cannot stand up to the executive, and it is an arm of the executive, that is not a strong legislature. Okay, so these are Institute of Legislative Studies, I hope you're noting. So these are the kinds of things, when we say strong institutions, this is what we mean, okay? They have labor and capital mobility, economic convergence, fiscal discipline, and trade integration. If you remember what happened with the euro, look at the Bundesbank. When we're all studying economics, the Bundesbank was the model central bank in the world. Having had the experience of Weimar Germany, where the German economy collapsed between the First and Second World Wars due to printing money, Germany built it was the first model of the ideal independent central bank. And it became the anchor, the pillar for the European economic integration. Everybody tried to be like the Bundesbank. And when convergence failed, if you remember, for those of you who are old enough to remember, we had a two-track euro. Germany said, we will not unite with anyone who has not converged. France was the first country to meet those convergence criteria, and they had Germany and France forming the initial Eurozone. So it was a two-track euro. It didn't start overall. So two countries decided, okay, we will be the common currency. And then as other countries met the criteria, they joined the Eurozone. Okay, so you need similar inflation and growth dynamics. And I'll show how in West Africa we are far, far from convergence. So what was the experience in the Eurozone? You had intra-regional trade acceleration. I have here now Europe, trading Europe being 60%. I know a few years ago when I was in Central Bank, it was 65% internal trade among European countries in the Eurozone. 65%. It's come down to 60% now, but that's it. But 60% is significant. We have in West Africa, or in the whole of Africa, 10 to 12%. The Southeast Asian countries have 35% trade among themselves, and they still don't have a single currency, although they do have a system now of benchmarking against the renminbi. So they had lower cost of capital because they adopted a single currency, which compressed sovereign bond yields. So a country like Greece, or a country like Portugal, or a country like Italy could borrow at the rate of euro bonds. And those euro bonds reflected the total capacity of European economies, so they benefited from the strength of Germany and France and the other stronger economies, and were able to borrow at lower rates of interest. If Nigeria gets its economy very right and it is able to raise low interest euro bonds, you can have an ECOWAS country a system where a Sierra Leone borrowing in eco bonds can enjoy the same yields that Nigeria has, leveraging the economic strength of Nigeria. So that's basically what one of the advantages, lower cost of capital for your infrastructure, for your development financing. The euro now achieved a global reserve status, is second to the US dollar. And you can imagine if the Asian countries decide to adopt the renminbi as a currency, with China being the world's largest manufacturing country and the second largest GDP, I believe the renminbi would overtake the euro as a global reserve currency. Okay? And then where will we be? Where will the naira be? Where will the cedi be in that world? We'll be in a world where nobody's even talking about us. You have the dollar, you have the euro, you have the renminbi. Where? No one will even talk about the yen. Even the Japanese yen will have to find its way. Indian rupee. Okay? Now, not to talk of cedi or a dollar. Now, we had fiscal vulnerabilities. These are challenges that Europe faced. Because you must remember that while monetary union has advantages, there is a big disadvantage, which is that you lose monetary independence. And that is a problem. Your central bank cannot, for example, pursue a counter-cyclical monetary policy, expand money supply, reduce interest rates to counteract recession, because you do not control your own monetary policy. Therefore, one of the things we as central bank governors always thought about was, if you're looking at all the benefits of saving transaction costs, you weigh that against the costs of losing monetary independence. Would you give up monetary independence when trade is only 10%? What are you saving in terms of transaction costs compared to what you're giving up? So that is the mindset of a central bank governor. So for you to get to the echo, you need to give us trade of 60%, where we see that there are huge transaction costs of this fragmentation, and it is worth it to give up monetary independence in order to achieve this. So you have fiscal vulnerabilities, asymmetric shocks, because localized shocks hit member states and you do not have your adjustment mechanism. You cannot adjust interest rates and devalue your own currency. Sometimes you have to devalue currency to absorb shocks, but you don't control that. Therefore, you can see after the COVID and after the global crisis, you could hear the cries from countries like Greece, okay, who suddenly found themselves almost as if in a prison. So when the going is good, as I said, those small countries benefit a lot. When the going is bad, they also lose a lot. So it's a high-risk venture for them, especially when you have strong, dominant economies. Again, if you go to an ECOWAS with Nigeria at 70% of that GDP, if you have a common currency with Nigeria, if Nigeria is hit by a shock or make a mistake, all those countries suffer. If Nigeria does well, all those countries benefit. So these asymmetric shock vulnerability is extremely important. On the other hand, if Sierra Leone has a problem, Nigeria does not suffer. So that's the point. But in ECOWAS, if Nigeria sneezes, the other countries would catch a cold. So they need to ask themselves, do you want to keep some social distance between you and this country, or do you want to come into their zone? And then Europe sometimes started having persistent economic divergence, because we must also not be naive about this. Even within economic zones, you can have an internal colonialism. Okay? You can have a situation where one country dominates the production, dominates the finance, and effectively, the other countries are like satellite economies. We probably run a different risk in Nigeria because, to be honest, I think that if with ACFA, what I'm seeing is if people have questions about Nigeria, they're going to set up manufacturing bases in Ghana, they're going to set up in Togo, they're going to set up in Burkina. They're going to import from those ports if they think those ports are more efficient than Nigerian ports, if they don't have to pay as much to get in through. And you are going to be the consumers. We will lose the tariffs because goods coming in from Asia, from Europe, from America will come through Lome. And there are no tariffs between Lome and Nigeria. And Lome collects all the money. Chinese investors go and set up a large factory producing goods for a market of 200 million in Ghana, when you know that Ghana does not have 200 million people, but you're producing those goods because you can just bring them to Nigeria. So we can actually end up as a consumer nation, whereas the production and value added is in neighboring countries. So it's important not to allow this idea of a common currency to blind us to the need for internal structural policies to make sure that we are positioned to take advantage of that integration. So what does history suggest for us to the path to sustainable eco? We need to build macro convergence. We need to have absolute central bank autonomy. And I was lucky, to be honest.